Hello, chess friends, and welcome to Zarov's Chess Channel, and welcome to the Tata Steel Masters Tournament in 2021. We're now in the round 12, and this was, I think, the derby of the tournament. We have Anish Giri versus Alireza Firouzja battling for the throne. Alireza Firouzja was half of a point behind Anish Giri. If Anish Giri wins this game because Fabiano Caruana drew his game, then Anish Giri is probably the winner of this super event. I think Anish Giri would be really proud to win such a great tournament, and he had now the opportunity to beat the direct competitor for the throne, of course, Alireza Firouzja. Let's check out on what happened. It was really an incredible game. So here, e4 played by Anish. We have e6 by Firouzja, the French. d4, d5. So far, the normal French defense setup. After knight to c3, we have the classical variation. Here, after move knight to f6, we have e5, and we have already the block pawn structure. I've mentioned it many times. The pawns are showing us the direction attack. Here, white is coordinating the attack towards the king side with f4, f5 moves. Black is trying c4, c5, c5, c4 pawn breakthroughs. Here, f4 played by Anish, still normal theory. c5 by Alireza Firouzja. We have knight to f3, knight to c6, and now bishop to e3. Here, a6. Here, Alireza is deviating maybe from the main line. The main line would be something like maybe queen to b6, challenging the pawn on d4 immediately. But this is still playable for both sides in the game. a6, as I said, with preparations, even in some occasions, to play the move b5. But when you play the move b5, then white is trying here. The idea is to create a blockade around the square d4. We'll come to that part, of course. Here, a3 by Anish. He's trying now to play something like d takes c5, followed with b4 is also a possibility. And here we have finally the c takes d4, a clarification in the center after knight to d4, bishop to c5, and now queen to d2. And the problem now for Alireza Firouzja is that if you try, for instance, to play something like knight takes d4, bishop to d4, bishop to d4, queen to d4, the only way that black can make progress is with the move b5. And here I think white can play something like bishop to d3. Queenside castling is even a possibility, because when we evaluate always in the French the bishop strength, the bishop of white is always much better. You see, we have a bad bishop situation here. We have here many pawns on light square, so that's why it's a favorable simply continuation here for white. And white has, I think, a comfortable game even in this line. Black has to be careful with the light square bishop, and you see now in the continuation of the game that Alireza will also have troubles to develop the bishop on cx. That's why I most of the time try to avoid the French, because it's simply not my style. It's simply too passive for me here for black, and I'm not sure even why Alireza is playing that. He's a sharp player. He really likes this aggressive lines, aggressive openings. I don't think that this French is simply fitting for him, because he already got in troubles after castling, which is still mainline. We have bishop to e2, and you see now Anish is preparing even to castle here. And what we want to do from white perspective is to crack the position around the square f5. That's our main goal here. Black is continuing, of course, with some attacks on the queen side. Here, queen to c7, played by Alireza Firouzja. If f5 happens, you have to take out. You have to also take care of your e5 pawn. In the game castling, we have b6. By Alireza, and we have now knight takes c6. Very good move, I think, because after queen to c6 we have now the opportunity to play b4. And here, after trades of pieces, queen to bishop to e3, queen to e3, Alireza plays now a very normal move, bishop to b7. But still, it's not an improvement of this bishop, because here a great move now by Anish Giri, because if you continue here, rook to c8, we will play simply on our blockade idea, knight to e2, and we're cementing the knight around the square d4. And I'm not sure how you're gonna kick away this knight. We can even support with rook to c1, then we can try c3, and this knight will be so powerful around the square d4. Maybe then something like afterwards, rook to e1 to support our e5 pawn, and then push f5. And I think from that point on, black could be really in serious trouble. So already the evaluation is much better because of this bad bishop position. I've talked about this problems in my French defense series. If you're familiar with my YouTube channel, I've created a series about the French. You can also check it out. I've talked many times about the bad bishop strategy here for white. White can always play simply on that bad bishop by black. It's really already simply bad position here, I think, for Alireza. I think he didn't want to get this position. So in order to make something happen here, Alireza has to play the move d4, but it doesn't help you out. Of course, queen takes d4 is not a possibility. Here we have the checkmate threat on g2, but here Anish Giri counterattacks, and he's trying to deliver checkmate also on h7. This line now forces further trades of pieces, which is not bad here for Anish Giri. What we can notice now also is that black has an isolated pawn, which is a long-term weakness. White, on the other hand, has, I think, a firm pawn structure, has a powerful centralized knight, has a great bishop's activity. It's almost an endgame stage, but I still like always more the position here for white. And in the game, bishop to d5 here played by Alireza, and we have now knight to g5, and this is of course a normal move. We're attacking the h7, we have g6, knight to f3, attacking the opponent. Here Alireza decided to give up his bad bishop, although the bishop got some kind of an activity, but you want to attack with your bishop something. After bishop to f3, rook to f3, still black is continuing the game with an isolated pawn. Still black has to solve these positional problems. The a6 pawn is also weak. You have to support it further. Here in the game, we have now b5 by Alireza. Maybe a5 is slightly better in order to get your pawns on dark squares, because your opponent has the light square bishop, and your pawns could be an object of white's attack of the white light square bishop. So maybe a5 to simplify the position, because there is also the tension on the a5, but still bishop to b5 could happen, then knight to b8, and again black is slightly passive. So the problem is also that it's almost an endgame stage, and we have pawns on both sides, and whenever we have pawns on both sides, then the bishop is much better in an endgame. So the evaluation here is again slightly better for white. In the game b5, Alireza fixes the pawn structure here on the queen side, and now bishop to e4, rook to d8, rook to c8 is not a possibility, because we'll simply attack further the d4 pawn, and there's no way that you can protect anymore. This pawn will simply play on a battery. Rook to d1, rook to d3, and this pawn is protected on c2. So again, black could have troubles to defend it. So here, after the move bishop to e4, rook from a to d8 was played by Alireza, and now rook to d3, simple normal idea to attack the weakness. Knight to b6, here bishop to b7, attacking the pawn, and now knight to a5, knight to a4 here by Alireza. We have bishop to a6, and now knight to c3, and you see now Alireza has lost the pawn. He has cemented his knight here on this very firm square on c3, but still I don't like this d4 pawn. Although you cannot double up rooks anymore, the knight is protecting that square, but still as a long-term plan, again, simply to attack the pawn is perfectly fine. So here bishop to b7, knight to e2, king to f2, and here Alireza gets his pawn back, but now the knight is a little bit out of game, because knight to d2 can happen, and now rook to d2, and now rook to d1 is also a possibility here to simply double up rooks and take out the pawn on d4. So what we can notice also here is a 2 versus 1 pawn majority. What the main strategy here for white is, it's simply to take out this pawn. What we want to create is 2 connected pass pawns. When that happens, it's a perfect endgame here for white. Maybe we could search for some ideas, maybe to give up 1 pawn somewhere here on the king side, but take out somehow here the pawn on b5. Then black could have maybe here, I don't know, maybe a 4 versus 2 pawn majority on the king side, but still, when we connect 2 pass pawns, it's simply, I think, too much to handle here for black. So in the game d3, which was now a risky choice by Alireza, he maybe should have played something like g5 in order to try to play knight to g6 and attack this weakness. Still, this pawn is protected, and again, if bishop to c6 happens, then we can play f6. f6 is a liberating line, at least for a while. I think we are opening up the f file. We could again create also some damage here against the king, which is now a little bit exposed here. But in the game d3, it is a simplification line in which Anish played, I think, a great move here. C takes c3, c takes d3. It doesn't help you out, of course. We traded off our pawn, and Black doesn't have this weakness anymore, this isolated pawn. So great move here by Anish Giri, c3, and still this weakness is there. This pawn is still something that white can attack. So knight to e2, we have king to e3. You have to play now actively with your king because it's an endgame stage. Knight takes c3, but now rook to d3, rook takes d3, and this was probably Alireza's main mistake now in the game. Rook to d3 wasn't the most accurate move here. Rook to b8, creating a tempo. Very important to stay with your rooks active. You don't want to lose this pawn. If you lose this pawn, as I said, it's losing endgame here for black. But Alireza went into simplified line. Rook to d3, king to d3, and now knight to a4. The problem is now that this pawn can be attacked by the bishop. Bishop to c6 is now the serious threat. Here rook to d8. Here Anish played king to e2. We have king to g7. Bishop to c6. As we said, this is our main goal. We have rook to b8 and now rook to c2. Also very nice move here by Anish, because he wants to have a clear path. He wants to go behind his rook and get the king here, where the king cannot be anymore attacked by the rook. And still, this is a long-term weakness. We don't have to rush into attacks. We can play simply then more freely with our more pieces. The rook is a little bit stuck here to the defense, and the problem is now that Anish Giri has cut off here the knight's ability to play. Knight to b6, if it happens, then we can simply take out the pawn, and this rook has taken also these two squares, the b2 square and the c3 square. So here king to f8, king to d2, we have king to e7, king to c1, and now after f6, e takes f6, king to f6, but now you see the king is going towards the knight, and here after move king to b3, okay, Alireza has a passed pawn, but still I like more the position of white. White will eventually take out this pawn. The problem is now we can play also rook to e2, so you don't have support here. You cannot advance the pawn to e5 to e4. The bishop is covering that square, and also with the support, white has a comfortable game. So king to d3, we have rook to f2. We have now this idea, e5. Now, very good move again by Anish Giri. He plays on the so-called Tarash rule. The Tarash rule says that we should go simply behind our enemy's pawns. He's attacking also the 7th rank. Here we have knight to b6, which again wasn't the best of moves here. Maybe rook to b6, at least challenging the bishop here. Rook to d7 would be the engine line sort of, and now maybe the king has to retreat. We could then maybe retreat with our bishop, or here maybe to a8, but at least you have protected your pawn for a while. But knight to b6 is risky, because now bishop to b5 comes with check, and here the evaluation is +5 for Anish Giri. So great I think endgame by Anish. He played very active with his rook, he played very active with his king. As I said, it feels, at least for me, that something is not working for great tacticians like Alireza in this French defense, Caro-Kann setups. He should play maybe really different, better, sharp lines. I've seen also in the past Mikhail Tal, for instance, playing the French defense, and he didn't have also a success in this particular opening. Mikhail Tal was, of course, a great King's Indian player, a great Benoni player, great neither player, where the position is getting messy. Here it was already a one-way ticket in this particular game, I think. Anish Giri didn't play maybe here an outstanding game, but he played really a calm game, and he has now decisive advantage. He can now win the game. So king to d4, we have a4. Knight to d5, we have rook takes h7. You see Anish takes now another pawn. We have e4, we have rook to f7, we have e3. The pawn is marching on, but still the good thing is that this bishop is protecting the very important e2 square. So now rook to f1, we have knight to c3, we have rook to f4, king to e5, and now simply rook to f3, attacking the pawn. And now here Alireza Firouzja takes out the bishop. Here we have rook takes e3, and here after king to d4, Anish Giri decided to sacrifice the bishop, but in order to get 4 pass pawns here, and still it's a winning endgame. But you have to prove now this endgame. The evaluation is about 1.5 here for white, so you have to be really accurate to win this endgame. It's not so easy, as I said. You have to find now really engine moves to make something happen, and this was really, from this point on, the game was really wild. So after the move rook to g6, knight to e4, Alireza plays now basically the best next engine move. He was low on clock, he had really about 1 minute on the clock here, which was really incredible. The Alireza found now really at the only defensive moves that he has to play in order to make a draw here. a5 by Anish, we have king to d5, we have here a6, and now knight to c5. First to check in here, the king comes to a3. Of course, here that's also weak pawn, so that's why after move knight to d3, we have a7 by Anish Giri. But a better idea, which is really incredible, is to play rook to g7, and it's very important to cut off here this king from the 7th rank. This knight is also out of the game, and maybe try now to push h4, h5, getting this pawn here. In the game a7, still nothing has changed. Again, if white plays this endgame correctly, it's still a winning endgame. Here after move rook to a8, we have now rook to g7, a different mover, but again with the same idea. King to c6, and now h4. Anish pushes now the pawn on the other side. Knight to f4, the only good move here. It was really the only good move here for Alireza, the move knight to f4, that helps him out at least for a while, because first of all, white cannot push the pawn on h5. Here in the game now comes really the critical moment of the game, and there is an engine line in order to make a win here. And unfortunately for Anish, he missed that. He played the move g4, which wasn't correct. The evaluation is now about equal. King to a4, much better, because now knight to d5 or king to b6 could be played, and now king to b3. We can maybe take out this pawn, but if you try to take out this pawn too early, then rook to a7, rook to a7 happens. Then king to a7, and now we can simply push g4. The knight is deflected always here to the king side. On the other hand, this king is always deflected here to the queen side, and the position is too stretched. Black cannot compete on both sides, so it would be a losing endgame here for Alireza. After king to a4, here maybe knight to h5 can be also a possibility, but again rook to h7, simply counter-attacking the knight, and then maybe g4. But the problem is now after the immediate g4 move that Anish Giri played, that here Alireza has this counter-attack knight to e6, and he gets now an extra tempo. Here rook to f7 was played, and you see now he plays knight to c7. The only engine line here Alireza saw in order to make his draw. He cuts off now the connection between the rook and the pawn, and he can grab now one pawn and go with this knight towards the king side. Then he can finally block it out. So what Alireza should never allow in this particular scenario is to trade off rooks to simplify position. He has to stay with the rook and the knight in order to attack further the pawns. Here after the move knight to c7, we have g5, but now here Alireza simply grabs a pawn, king to b2, and now rook to a1, we have g6, knight to e6, we have h5, rook to a8. Very important move to block really with the further progress. If you try g5 here, g7 immediately, then knight to g7 will happen, rook to g7, and we can take out now this pawn, and it's a theoretical draw. So again, nothing dramatically has changed. So here Anish tried rook to h7, but Alireza goes simply rook to g8. Again, you cannot push the pawn on h6, you lose simply this one. If you try here g7, then we have knight to g7, and again nothing special is going on. It's again a drawish line. So here rook to g8 was played, g7, and here after the move after move rook to g8, in this position both players agree to a draw. So incredible stuff what Alireza pulled off here. Got a draw in a completely losing endgame. Wow stuff. It's incredible that knight could have hold 4 pawns on the board. I'm just really a bit sorry here for Anish Giri. He should have won this game, because as we said, Fabiano Caruana only drew his game, and if Anish would have won this game before the last round, Anish would have a comfortable full point lead in front of Fabiano Caruana, and he would be probably even the winner today. Unfortunately for him, he has to struggle more tomorrow. He has to make a positive result tomorrow, because Anish Giri, Fabiano Caruana and Alireza Firouzja still have the opportunity to win this very nice event. And also I think Jorden van Foreest is also very good in this tournament. He can also be a surprise. We haven't talked about Jorden van Foreest here in this tournament, but I think he has also positive chances maybe to even win this. This would be really great. We have two Dutch players playing here for the throne. Really incredible stuff, and I wish him all of the best, of course, in the continuation of the tournament. So this was it. Alireza got away with murder in this game. If you want to see more games from this tournament, check out my coverage so far. Here's the link. And if you want to see maybe the best chess games of all times, check out my best chess games of all time series. Here's also the link. And if you like this content, don't forget to subscribe to my channel. See you soon with some more videos, and chess is the best, of course.